Welcome, artists. We are beginning our second step in our portraits unit, and that step is drawing noses. Noses are historically challenging to draw. We're going to focus on the front view today, and I don't want you to be afraid. What makes noses difficult is that they're mostly shading. There's very few definite lines. So drawing an outline of a nose doesn't work, especially from the front. And so you have to teach yourself to embrace the shading aspect. If you want to make a realistic nose, that's what you're going to have to do. So without further conversation, here are a couple noses that I've begun. I was messing around with noses, and the first step I want to show you is how to do a basic structure for a nose to give yourself a guide that is reliable. It teaches you how to draw a basic nose, but just understand that this is just a structure. It's just a foundation that in practice, noses are all completely different, and you're going to have to make adjustments when you draw realistic noses from person to person. And we'll look at that in a moment. So here's the steps. They're not complicated. The first thing you do is you draw a circle. This represents the front tip of the nose, and it's just a nice easy form to start out with. Doesn't have to be a perfect circle. The second step is going to be to make two lines that come up off the edges of this circle, and they should go out a little at the top, which represents your eyebrows. So there's the first step. Next, you want to cut this circle on your nose in half. Try and make sure you go straight across, and then you're going to extend those lines about the same distance on each side, curving slightly downwards. Okay? Then I'm going to take two lines that go up, and then two more lines that makes kind of the beginning of a triangle shape here. And then last, you're going to connect these lines right here. And that's just a basic structure of a nose. Now, this is not my method. I didn't invent it. But it works well, and so I use it. So the next step is to create the nostrils. They are up inside these two bottom little triangles here. And like I said, you're going to find in practice, we're going to see in a minute, that this varies so much from person to person that this is just, we're giving ourselves a basic structure, not a uniform equation. So there's the bottom of the nose, nostrils, and then you have out here on the edge, I like to think of these as parentheses because they kind of are that shape for most people. So these lines that I just showed you are really the only definite lines you see on someone's nose. The rest, all up through here and around, are all shading. Now, like I said, this principle works for someone who has a wide, fat nose. You just have to change that first shape. It becomes an oval. It works for someone who has a long, tall, skinny nose. Again, you're just changing the shape. Here I changed the shape again, made the bridge of the nose much wider. As you can see, this is a very beginning of what could be a very cartoonistic nose. I'll show you here real quick. So even though that looks somewhat real, I could turn that into a cartoon character that would work really well, right? Just as simple as that. If I erase the guidelines, we've got a nice few outlines here. Now this is not realistic, it's what's called stylized. Stylized just means that it's easily recognizable. It's not real, just you can tell what it is, and you can tell that that's a nose really easy, right? So let's get back to our realistic noses though. Like I said, this this initial structure that you create with the circle and the two vertical lines should be very light so that you can go back and shade over it. I'm going to actually lighten this up even more so that when I shade over it, it doesn't affect my shading. Now you can barely see that. I can see it a little better than you can see it on the screen. And if you follow the guide that is posted in Canvas, you can see that one of the steps is to begin to shade around this part of the nose. Now again, the way you shade is going to depend on the light source and where it's coming from. This type of shading that you're going to see me do is a overhead, directly above type shading. Some shading is going to be, like I said, very different depending on your light source. So I'm just using little circles of the shade. And you don't want to turn your pencil, because once you get the tip of your pencil blunted, it's much easier to shade with because it makes a thicker line, and that's a lot easier to control. So you can see just already that this is starting to look a little more realistic. And I'm not going to do a super thorough job of shading this. I'm just going to do enough that you can see how effective this method is for creating a realistic nose. You don't want any hard edges. Yes, there are people that have very hard angles in their nose, but most people's noses, all the curves are rounded. Leave the tip of the nose, a little bit of a highlight there. Making darken in our nostrils. And what you can do, let me get rid of these little guidelines here. What you can do, a good shading tool is a tissue. And what a tissue does is it helps push that graphite around your paper and soften it up. You'll find that after you do this, you got to go back and probably add some more graphite, but this just helps it be nice and soft. Like I said, I'm not going to be super thorough, but you can see how this is already looking very realistic. It's got some dimension to it. It's not just flat and two-dimensional like this nose. It actually looks like it's beginning to come up off the page a bit. Have some form. So I'm going to leave this at this, because I think you get the idea at this point. I can add some nice highlights with my eraser. Soften the edges of those back up. And there you go. So that's a pretty decent nose, right? So I wanted to show you as a next step that this process works with real noses. And so this is a printout of the picture that is posted in Canvas. These are the 6 Guardians of the Galaxy's noses. I'm not sure how much they would appreciate me showing off their noses, but it is what it is. So let me start over here and show you how this works. So if I go over the tip of his nose, now his isn't a perfect, it's more like an oval, right? And then there's the two lines on the side. You divide it in half, curves downward, two edges, and then connect the bottom. You can see that that works really well. And then again, the nostrils are there. Now you can see in this picture that his nostrils are a little different shape. That's something you have to consider when you're drawing a real person, that most of the time our faces, even down to our nostrils, are not perfectly mirrored. They're not exactly the same on both sides. There's slight differences. So when you're drawing and you want to make someone look realistic, just keep in mind that their two eyes are going to be just slightly different. Not drastically different usually, but slightly. Their nose, each side of their nose is going to be slightly different. Even each side of their mouth is going to be slightly different. So here again, let's do this, guys. Now the tip of his nose is really big, right? It's a big circle. And you got the edges of his bridge of his nose. You got the two parenthesis type shapes. Now this is interesting. This is where another variation comes in. Remember how we cut the circle in half and then bent it down? Well, his nostrils are all the way down here. And we bent them in half. And we still can connect the tip. You see this right here too? The kind of bottom little peak thing. Some of us, you can see that part of our nose underneath. But the principle still works out to where you can see all of those things. All right, let's do this one more time. Now her nose isn't exactly a circle at all. It's got kind of this point, kind of a triangle on the bottom, and then it rounds on the top. And then again, you have where you cut the nose. You have the sides of the bridge of her nose. The parentheses. But again, the principle works out to create a realistic nose. And if I went in and shaded all that, and I hadn't used a red pen, it would work out really well. So what you're going to do is you're going to pick 3 of these noses from this specific printout, and you are going to try to draw those 3 noses the best you can. That's actually the second step. The first step is to create, I'll go over this again. You're going to create 3 of these structured drawings. So you'll have 1, 2, 3 of these going across your page that have all the steps included. Edge of the nose. Okay, that'll look like this, 1, 2, 3. And then on the bottom of your page, I've already done one of mine. I'll have 1, 2, 3 of the Guardian's noses. You can see that this one, let's see how I did. This one is actually this nose. It's pretty good. I got the shape right. I think I probably need a little more shading to darken it up, but you can see the similarities there. And I used that structure. I started out with that basic structure you see up here, but I just changed some subtle variations and I made them work. So make 3 structured noses, and then you're going to choose 3 of the Guardian's noses and draw them as realistically as you can on one page. So enjoy, artists, and I look forward to seeing your work.